Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And in this video, I wanted to talk about another great article from Sasha Segan over at PC Magazine. And the title reads T-Mobile Standalone 5G Boosts Rural Coverage at the Cost of Speed. A few of you have emailed me when this article released a while back and asked me, what does this mean? Why at the cost of speed? And how is this boosting coverage over versus LTE? So right now, most of the 5G that we see today is NSA, non-standalone. So it usually cuts out much sooner because it is not a standalone connection. Now, with a standalone connection and 600 megahertz being a lower frequency, it's newer, it had newer software development. T-Mobile says they can push it 30% more. So if you're pushing your coverage 30% more from the existing cell site, that means as you expand the radius of the coverage, more people latch on to that signal and that bandwidth. And the bandwidth doesn't magically increase. So if you effectively have more users using that same bandwidth. So now the speeds are going to be slower. It's just, there's nothing T-Mobile can do. There's no additional technology they can add. It's going to be slower. The only thing that they can do to offset this is build more sites. They will eventually have to do this because that is going to get congested. As you extend the wavelength, it's going to congest depending on area. And in some very rural places, it won't matter much. If you can still pull 30, 40 megabits per second, and after you extended the coverage 30% more, then you're fine. It's not a big deal. But in a lot of areas, it's not going to work. It's not going to work very well. Perfect example, my work location. There's too many people in one place at the same time to make this work. Yes, the coverage is here, but it has absolutely no capacity, especially indoors. So they have to build another cell site. It's kind of a very similar scenario to a urban market. You can't cover a 4-mile radius with one cell site. It's not going to work. It's too many people latching onto the sectors. So you have to build density. So they have to do the same thing that they did during HSPA with midband. They have to do that now onto their coverage when the network calls for it. The engineers are tracking this daily. They know which areas are bad and which areas aren't. They have the network tools. They have the UCLA reports. They see the speed tests. They see it all. So they have to future plan to offset that. So that is something that they have to work through. So another great article by Sasha Segan, but I will leave it in the description down below so you can check it out in its entirety. But just to simplify it, that's really what it means. As they extend the coverage more and more people latch onto that same signal, the speeds are just naturally going to be slower. So in the second part of the video, what I wanted to speak on today is what my outlook is for T-Mobile starting 2022. Why did I pick 2022? Because I think 2021 is already in the books. They have a plan that is already set. They're executing as we speak, or as I speak, and they are not going to deviate from that plan, in my opinion, unless something drastically changes, which I highly doubt. They're not deviating from this plan. They're not spending a penny outside of the $12 billion, as I mentioned. They're going to stay within their plan. What changes in 2022? What's my outlook for 2022? Just to briefly speak on this, I think this year is where we really start seeing N41 scale. They started scaling it last year in April. It started slow, it picked up volume, and then it went bananas starting around June, July. Why did that happen that way? We were still in the pandemic, and we still are. So municipalities haven't fully returned to a normal, which is starting to happen more and more. Neville talked about it last year. He talked about it again not too long ago. he still has a permit backlog. They're going to the sites and they want to touch them. That's why he says the process is totally different from anyone else's. He's not asking the cities to build new sites, new infrastructure. He just wants to touch all the 50,000 sites that he built in the urban suburban areas. They've had the density. So the whole notion of people telling me T-Mobile doesn't have the density, I try to explain this to people. During HSPA and early LTE days, they had no low band. They had to build their network on densification. That's why they lacked coverage. They made it a priority to build sites between a mile to 2 miles apart at best. They had to. They couldn't have any other. If not, some of the areas would have had no service. They had no low band frequency until they got band 12. They had none. I posted a picture of this on my Instagram. If you want to check it out, go ahead and follow that. They had 0 megahertz of low band. So they had no choice but to build on density. Yes, in some areas they lack. There's some parts of some areas where they don't have necessarily the grid for it, but they're fixing that with Sprint keep sites. And then in some areas where the market share did call for it, they built their own density on their own grid. Like El Paso, LA, and Chicago's the bigger markets. They have the urban density, and in some cases now they even have the suburban density to pull this off. So what are they transitioning into in 21? So just to make this as short as possible, this will be a longer video, but to make this as short as possible, they are transitioning currently, and this is a priority from what I'm being told, they are transitioning the anchor network, which is exactly according to plan. They are building the Sprint spectrum on the T-Mobile grid. That has taken priority. Why has that taken priority? One, they can effectively migrate the Sprint customer without any issues. Neville Ray said that they would have enough capacity on the current T-Mobile grid with the Sprint spectrum to migrate all of the Sprint customers. That is what he stated. Again, that's not what I'm saying. That's what he's saying. They ran the analysis and they said that they would have enough capacity to migrate every single existing Sprint customer to the T-Mobile network, whether it be a full migration or the TNX SIM. And then he says they would still have access capacity to offer home internet. So they are effectively going to be the fastest at scaling home internet. Verizon does not have access to C-band yet. So in order for them to scale any home internet, they have to lay fiber in the ground and they got to build infrastructure because that's coming from millimeter wave. In some cases, in some areas, yes, they're offering it through their LTE network, but that's not in many places. I try to check for some availability here, not happening. They're not offering it here. So like maybe in more lower volume suburban areas and some rural areas, they're offering it through their LTE network. But in many cases, their capacity for LTE network does not call for them to offer additional home internet. So again, T-Mobile is able to scale home internet by just adding that spectrum onto their existing grid. So we'll see how that goes. I'm testing it here in a couple of days. I got an email last night stating that it finally shipped. I ordered this product early January. It shipped on February 21st. So it is on back order. There's heavy volume. As I mentioned, it's in its pilot stage still. They have not officially advertised or marketed this to the market, and it's already picking up big volume. So once that fully gets officially launched to the public, I predict this being a big deal for T-Mobile, as I mentioned in my previous videos, and I hope they have several warehouses ready to carry this product. So again, 22 and beyond, I see the new sites coming into play. I don't see that happening this year. I think this year is the planning stage for that. So to kind of give you insight on what I've been hearing is the first half of this year is still going to be heavily, heavily prioritized on adding the scaling the N41. That that won't change. I don't think that changes in 22 or 23. What's happening as of the second half of this year, they're going to start using a capex that's been set aside to start adding the Sprint keep sites. So the Sprint keep sites have already been added. If you're a T-Mobile user, you probably would never notice, because some of these keep sites, they kick in where T-Mobile has weak coverage, and then you pick up where you left off. So everything is starting to be integrated and working under one core. So what's going to start happening with these Sprint keep sites, T-Mobile is investing to go to those sites and upgrade them to the latest and greatest. So they will start upgrading those Sprint keep sites with newer baseband units, backup generators, and the T-Mobile spectrum and equipment. So the N41 massive MIMO panels, the N71 panels, they will all go on the Sprint keep sites that they have. They've been working on this network model 2 years prior to the merger even being approved. So they've had a head start long before this merger even got approved. So the network model is set. They know exactly what sites they're going to keep and what sites they're going to decommission. They're going to work through that in 21, and some of that will flow over into 22. But this year, they're going to be able to get a lot of that network modeling done. Touching the Sprint keep sites, they actually increased that. It was, if I remember correctly, it was 10,000 that they were going to keep. Now that's 12,000. So they added an additional 2,000 Sprint keep sites. So they're very serious about the densification. They, like I said, the network modeling, they did the calculations, and it's in the works. I've mentioned on an update previously, they are doing site relocations too. So they're moving the racks higher where it calls for it or where it makes sense. So on the same rack where a Sprint rack is on, if they don't move it all the way to the top where the Sprint rack is, they're relocating their own rack. So in some of those cases, those sites could be also considered Sprint keep sites, where they move their rack to the Sprint rack. So they might be on that same rack, but they'll just label it a Sprint keep site, take all their equipment off, and add it to the Sprint rack. That could be another option, but that is expected to happen in the second half of this year. What's also expected to happen in the second half of this year are the backhaul boosts that everybody's been waiting for. The multi-gig backhaul boost. So there's a 2, 5, and a 10 gig. How that exactly plays out, I don't know. We'll likely get more info on that as it gets closer, but they are working through that in the second half of this year. So sites are going to start seeing massive speed increases as they go from 40 to 60 to 80. Some areas are going to go to 100 megahertz where it's cleared or where it's not fragmented. So this is going to be massive. The iPhone is set to get the standalone update soon with 14.5. That's when I expect everyone to start seeing standalone N41. The iPhone 13, I think, will also be important because the X60 or 65 that is likely to go in that device will be the first device to present carrier aggregation with N71 and N41. So that's another milestone that T-Mobile is waiting to hit, and that's when I think voice over NR will come into play. We will get voice over NR before that on the Galaxy devices, I predict. I'm sure that's already in testing now for T-Mobile, but in the second half of this year, once iPhone 13 releases, I'm sure that's when they'll make a big deal of it and say it's nationwide. So I just wanted to kind of speak on that. I still think there's much more to uncover. T-Mobile is on a path of being a very powerful player and a threat. They are a threat to AT&T and Verizon, no matter how we look at it, because the numbers show it. The recent root metrics reports are showing a massive increase. I know it's only the first 15 cities. They added another, I want to say 3-4 cities this morning. Louisville, Kentucky was added, and a couple of more. T-Mobile is having a tremendous boost in performance according to Root. Remember, that's a scientific test. They drive within the market that they test. They drive anywhere from 15 to 2,500 miles in that same market, and they have a toolkit. They have a software. They walk around with a big backpack suitcase type thing, and they got the phones in there. And again, it's a scientific testing, and T-Mobile has improved drastically in some of the markets. Will that be a trend that continues? That remains to be seen. We'll have to check. I now think we're going to start seeing updates daily from Root with new markets. But the first few markets are very telling that T-Mobile is improving drastically. Speeds are increasing, the scores, the calling scores are going up, the data performance is going up. So they're improving drastically. And I think that carries over into the second half of this year. And they may, outright win some of those markets. That definitely could happen. I mean, Verizon has some serious competition on its hands now, and they don't necessarily, at this point, have the spectrum assets to really combat this. It seems they can't scale the small cells as fast as they would like in some areas, and they'll have to wait until they can get their hands on that precious C-band that they're going to spend billions of dollars for, and to see how quickly they can scale that and how quickly they can make a return on that investment. So let me know how you feel about this in the comment section down below. Again, T-Mobile heading down a successful path. I don't think they deviate. I don't think they do anything extraordinary outside of their current plan, as I mentioned. I think they continue spending the same that the guidance set out for them, and I think they get a lot done with that $12 billion. So if you have been on the channel or you are new to the channel and you have not yet liked, shared, subscribed, make sure you do so. Hit the notification bell so you are notified when I do upload content. Make sure to follow the social media outlets for more updates and interactions. This is Tyrone with Tech Life. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.